Advancing the cause of liberty takes more than just coming up with ideas. It means making them happen. This is Society and the State. Life, liberty, and your pursuit of happiness. Now, your hosts, Connor Boyack and Brian Hyde.
Welcome, everybody, to a fun question mark episode.
I like that.
About abortion. Okay. There was recently a viral post from a Mormon mom, blogger. She's got, I think, like 6 kids. And this got all sorts of media attention on it because she was talking about men's roles in unwanted pregnancies. We'll link to this on the show notes page to one of many stories about it. Show notes page for today is societyandthestate.com/117. All right. So this mom on Twitter went through this rant. So she's Mormon like I am. The Mormon part is actually not relevant to this at all. She's basically a female who is talking about the male role in unwanted pregnancy. And it all boils down to, so for example, she says, I have a good understanding of arguments surrounding abortion, religious and otherwise. I've been listening to men grandstand about women's reproductive rights, and I'm convinced men actually have zero interest in stopping abortion. So I guess Brian and you and I are men, right? So yes. I guess we're going to mansplain a little bit here and actually have...
Only if I have to.
Actually have an opinion, shocking, about, people's life, and heaven forbid we have something to say on the topic. But this woman, what is her name? Gabrielle Blair. And the entire argument boils down to this. In her own words, this was her summary, okay? In capital letters at the end of her rant, she says to men, stop trying to control women's bodies and sexuality, period. Unwanted pregnancies are caused by men. Okay, what? This categorical statement is one that I'm really concerned with, and I think it bespeaks an underlying problem in the entire abortion debate. That not only can men not have anything to say about abortion because it's women's bodies, but that all unwanted pregnancies without qualification are caused by men, presumably biologically, because were it not for the sperm that was provided in that exchange, there would be no unwanted pregnancy. But this is such an extreme cop-out. In an era, I'm sure this woman, this left-leaning feminist gal is also like a Me Too, fan, where we're all talking about sexual consent and how important it is. How can we be talking on the one hand about consent and on the other hand about one party being entirely at fault for abortion? I'm sorry, but unwanted pregnancies are often the result of a consensual sexual encounter in which protection was not used or whatever, right? To say that all unwanted pregnancies are the fault of the man because it's his sperm that caused the pregnancy is ridiculous. It absolves the woman of all responsibility. It basically infers that all sexual encounters are rape that result in pregnancy. That's basically what she's saying, because were it not that case, if the underlying sexual activity was consensual and not rape, why in the world would this woman and others like her believe that the woman does not share responsibility? This seems to me an extreme position, Brian, and yet this went totally viral.
It did. And maybe it's because it's extreme. I mean, I don't know. We live in a time where if you want to be noticed, you have to push beyond the fringes, to draw attention to yourself. And maybe that's what she was doing. I seem to recall, didn't she use the term, I think she called it, it's irresponsible ejaculation that's responsible for creating these pregnancies. But her solution, you remember what her solution was?
Mm-mm.
Men should have a vasectomy.
Wow.
At the time they hit puberty, every male should have a vasectomy. And she says, no, come on, they're easily reversed. So if they ever want to get married and have kids, they can just, undergo the knife and have it reversed. But yeah, I would say that's a pretty extreme approach. And it seems to play into the whole rape culture mentality, because otherwise men are ultimately rapists at heart, and they're going to be out there irresponsibly impregnating women who have nothing whatsoever to do with what happens.
I mean, Here, I'm looking at one post about this topic, and we're going to move on to kind of the broader issue, but this is the way we introduce the topic to talk about the problem. So, Huffington Post, they include all of this lady's tweets, and then they're including responses to those tweets to see what other people are talking about it. And so after a bit of profanity, this other woman replying to our friend here, Gabrielle, says, "This is the most comprehensive, reasonable, well-researched, and logical assembly of ideas written on this subject, like forever. I'm reposting everywhere." Interestingly, she then tags it with Kavanaugh confirmation hearings, which have nothing to do with abortion, but it shows based on an episode we did a couple of times ago how important that Supreme Court hearing process is, that they want to use these hashtags to get more relevance. Here's another tweet comment from another woman. "Gabrielle, thank you so much for speaking out on this. I'm over here nodding and favoriting and just, yes, thank you. I appreciate that you're using your personal capital to talk about abortion and disingenuousness." So she's talking about how intercourse between man and woman prioritizes male pleasure above all else. And as you point out, Brian, irresponsible ejaculation, and that, we're required to protect our bodily fluids in other contexts from not infecting and getting on other people. Is she suggesting that kissing should also not be done? Like a consensual exchange of bodily fluids should just be totally denied? I'm confused.
I have to admit that as I read through her rant, but probably a third of the way through, it was just like so much white noise because there was so much anger, and I'm not sure I understand the point that she's trying to make other than, man, this is all on you. And I don't think that does anything to resolve any real issues that may surround not just, rape or sexual abuse or unwanted pregnancy. It just plants a flag, firmly in this far corner of the feminist fringe.
And at the end of the day, it gets back to this idea that like men should have nothing to say about this. These male lawmakers, right, and government officials should stay out of women's bodies. But that kind of denies the relevance of the underlying conversation. And what I mean by that is it's not just about the woman's body. To distill it down to that point is disingenuous, because it's not just a woman's body at that point. There's another life there as well. And so to simply say that women should have full control over their own bodies really does not address the actual point, because then even the fiercest proponents of that will walk back that they should be able to terminate the pregnancy of a child that's like 8 months and 29 days, right? That's not a very common position to say, that until I give birth I should be able to kill my baby. It seems to be in this like early period where people are more comfortable using the argument that, well, it's my body. I want to introduce, Brian, a different angle on this issue that I think a lot of people don't talk about. This was a subject of a blog post that I wrote 6 years ago, so we'll link to it on today's show notes page, societyandthestate.com/117. And this was my attempt to frame the abortion debate from the context of property rights. Admittedly, in more libertarian circles, abortion is not a settled issue, as it isn't anywhere, frankly. There's no single libertarian position on abortion. Some take it from a so-called pro-choice perspective, that it is the woman's body, that you should not aggress against the woman, compel her to, continue supporting this child and so forth. And then, of course, there's the pro-life side, the non-aggression principle, to say, well, that life deserves protection as much as me or the woman, and so we have to not aggress against that child, that human, as well. So there's two sides of the coin here. Murray Rothbard, who otherwise is an amazing person who's written a great deal of amazing things, he pioneered this idea of evictionism, where the mother has the right at any time to evict the growing baby inside of her. So here's what he says, and Brian, I'd like to talk about this because I find this kind of a scary concept. He says that most discussion of the issue of abortion bogs down in minutia about when human life begins, when or if the fetus can be considered to be alive, etc. All this is really irrelevant to the issue of the legality of abortion. The Catholic anti-abortionist, for example, declares that all that he wants for the fetus is the rights of any human being. In other words, the right not to be murdered. But there's more involved here, Rothbard says, and this is the crucial consideration. If we're to treat the fetus as having the same rights as humans, then let us ask, what human has the right to remain unbidden as an unwanted parasite within some other human being's body. This is the nub of the issue, the absolute right of every person, and hence every woman, to the ownership of her own body. What the mother is doing in an abortion is causing an unwanted entity within her body to be ejected from it. If the fetus dies, this does not rebut the point that no being has a right to live unbidden as a parasite within or upon some person's body. So Rothbard is basically saying that just as you have the right to your property, to your person, you should be able to, and you have the right to free association. Like, Brian, I want to invite you to my home. I also, as part of that right of association, have the right of disassociation. I can say, Brian, you pissed me off, leave. And you have to leave. That's my right, my property right. Property rights apply to your person as well. I have the right to my person. And so he's extending it to say, I as a woman, that even if I invited that guest into my home, I have the right to basically tell that guest to leave and basically abort the baby. Now, the problem I have with this, Brian, and then I'd love your reaction to this, and there's other stuff I want to say here too, but the problem I have with this is if the eviction results in fatality, that's a different calculus, especially when you were the one that invited the guest. It's not like you just showed up at my home. If you show up at my home and I didn't ask you to come, and kicking you out of my home means that you're going to be hungry or cold or whatever, that's not my problem. I didn't invite you in the first place, right? But if I say, hey, Brian, I'd like you to come over for dinner, and then I kick you out into the snow and you don't have any clothes or whatever, that's on me because I invited you into those circumstances that I'm then later forcing you into worse circumstances as a result of my initial invitation. That, I think, is the problem with this concept here. That is the problem, I think, with this Gabrielle and others like her who deny any relevance of the mother, the woman's initial consensual act. When you have consensual intercourse, you are inviting the repercussions. By the very nature of the act of intercourse, there are potential consequences to that act that you're necessarily inviting. You pick up one end of the stick, the other end of the stick is going with it. And so if you've consented to that original act of intercourse and then pregnancy comes along with it, you've invited that human being into your body. And as a result of that, you can't morally or ethically or anything legally kick that human out, kill that human, just as if I have a boat and I invite you, hey, let's go on a boat ride into shark-infested waters. But no, it's fine. We're on a boat. We're protected. We'll go, have some fun. And then we get out into those shark-infested waters and I push you off the edge of the boat because, hey, it's my boat. I'm sorry, but that's flagrantly wrong. And that's the problem I have with this concept of abortion, where those who are consenting to the original act basically want to avoid all consequences of their action. I think it's safe to say we live in a society where people are increasingly comfortable in avoiding consequences of their actions writ large on many other topics. And that's the problem I have here with abortion, is that people want to engage in sexual intercourse, but they do not want the consequences of that act, whether you call it what was Gabrielle's term? The irresponsible ejaculation. It's irresponsible copulation on the woman's part. Brian, sorry, I'm riffing here. This gets me all hot and bothered. What's your take?
This hits a nerve with me. So in full disclosure, I will tell you, I was adopted. My sisters were adopted. All of us were adopted just a few years prior to the Roe v. Wade decision. And so it weighs on my mind. Would things have been different had, that Roe v. Wade decision been along, a few years earlier? So I'm very staunchly anti-abortion, except in the most extreme circumstances. My wife, her mom had a heart defect, from birth, and was told when she was pregnant with my wife, you've got to abort this child, or this pregnancy will kill you and the child. Wow. And her mom bravely said, I don't care. I'm going to go ahead and have her. And she had her and two more besides that. And she's still with us today. So, it's not the panacea.
Sure.
But I've wondered many times, and maybe you can shed some insight on this, why wasn't this a big struggle at the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia in 1787? Why wasn't abortion a central issue? Or for that matter, throughout most of American history, why wasn't it, a central political debate? Slavery was. Mm-hmm. Obviously, that was a great moral issue. Mm-hmm. And I think it's because the focus in those earlier years was on the innocent life that was at stake. And for those who would maintain, a product of conception or whatever euphemism you want to use, to dehumanize that life, if it's not really a life, then why do you have to kill it to stop it from growing? I'm just asking. But now the focus has shifted from the innocent life that's at stake to the reproductive rights of the woman. And that's pretty much where most of the abortion debate takes place today. And I think you're zeroing in on, but there is a life at stake. And where there's an innocent life at stake, that changes the landscape somewhat.
I come down on the side of, I've seen this as a meme before shared around on social media where it shows like a zygote, right? Like this cell division that's happening and imagines the discovery of this zygote on Mars and how universally every Earthling would be thrilled to find life on Mars.
Yep.
Right? Here are the beginnings of life or the evidence thereof from long before, right? Like, oh my heavens, let's celebrate, and what a marvelous scientific discovery that would be. But suddenly when that zygote is a division of a cluster of cells in a woman's body, as you point out, the so-called reproductive rights, or I should call it the dodging of accountability and personal consequences, it gains the entire focus. And I'm glad you brought up the point, Brian, the term dehumanize. I think that's what's at issue here. It's the same thing with war. People are increasingly comfortable killing other people if they perceive them to be the other or not like us or barbaric, right? And before you have any war, you always have psychological warfare. You have to condition your people to be willing to go kill these other people. You have to portray them as being beneath you in a religious context, a social context, an economic context.
They have to be like insects.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to spray them with some Raid. And Raid, hey, we tout. It kills bugs dead.
Yeah.
But when it comes to abortion, we don't use words like kill. We get clinical. Well, this is going to just terminate the pregnancy and remove the product of conception. And
right.
It's euphemistic, but the same thing is taking place.
You're dehumanizing it. You're not talking about what you're not using terms. I mean, Orwell talked about how the English language is sometimes used with such hot air. In other words, these words are used to the point of meaninglessness, as you just gave a great example where we're talking about the same thing, but in two entirely different ways that evoke either emotion or lack thereof.
Well, and even in war, collateral damage, or sometimes they'll use the more crass bug splat. Whoops, that drone strike. Yeah, we got the bad guy, but the kids who were playing soccer, they're a few feet away. Yeah, well, they became bug splat. Dehumanizing, they're not our kids. They don't look like us. They don't speak the same language. So it's okay that it didn't happen to us.
I found the Orwell quote, Brian, and I think it's very relevant here. George Orwell said that political language is designed to make lies sound truthful and murder respectable, and to give an appearance of solidity to pure wind. So I think that's what's happening in this debate is we have to dehumanize it to make it acceptable. We have to blame the man. We have to elevate the rights of the woman and her decision to absolve herself of any consequence or accountability for her actions. How sad this is that women have degraded themselves in this way. To me, this is not the elevation of the woman and the female and the empowerment of the female. This is a debasing of the woman, that I can do whatever I want. I can avoid accountability. It's my body. I have no regard, for life. It's entirely at my good will and pleasure, and I'm just going to go out and be this atomistic individual that doesn't care about other things other than my own, personal interests, however fleeting they may be. That to me is not like the ideal woman in our society, and it's crazy and sad and disappointing that like we talked a couple episodes ago about the Supreme Court battle and how the left is just, going nuts over Roe v. Wade. It's always all about protecting Roe v. Wade. It's always even though Roe, the woman that was Roe, hates that ruling and totally disagrees with it and has a change of heart. She's like, no, this is horrible. Like, I don't support what the Supreme Court decided. But yet that is what the so-called left demands. That is their sacrament. It is their end goal in politics, is to preserve the ability to terminate the product of conception at any time they like.
To avoid consequences.
To avoid consequences. That's what it really boils down to. And sadly, we see that in other issues in politics as well. But I wanted to at least bring this up, Brian, and frame the debate a little this way, because at the end of the day, I think it's a fair analogy to say if you consensually invite someone into your property, whether it's your real property in terms of land, your home, or, into your body, if you somehow were this scientifically possible, if I say, hey, Brian, let's be Siamese twins and, you can share my heart. And so doctors figure out some way to sew us together and integrate your body into my heart. And then I decide, no, never mind. See you later. Cut them off and then you die. Like, wait a minute. I invited you into the very circumstances that later led to your death. I think that's fundamentally wrong. And I don't know that any pro-abortionists can really defend against that. I think they try and dodge issues like that. I think that's why this Gabrielle person tries to basically dismiss it as entirely the man's fault, so she doesn't have to talk about female consent and their involvement in the whole process. It just gives them an easy out to not prick their conscience or have to talk about these underlying issues. And that's sad, because what are we talking? We're talking about the destruction of millions of lives. This is the systematic extermination of human life. And the fact that more people aren't up in arms about it, the fact that we're used to it, the fact that dehumanizing language is kind of standard in this whole thing is just disheartening.
I'm with you. And I applaud you for being brave enough to bring this up. When you told me you wanted to discuss this, I'll admit, my heart kind of skipped a beat and went, oh, that's a subject that's so fraught with emotion. But I like the way that you have taken this on, and I think you've laid out there's a clear moral and ethical case, not just a political one, to be made here.
All right, guys, we'll wrap it up there. Whatever your take on the issue, at least that's a new, interesting one. Hopefully you check out the link, societyandthestate.com/117. We'll go back to less controversial and divisive topics here in the future. But we got to get that one out of our system. I can't promise we won't talk about it again. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. Make sure you subscribe, share it with your friends, and we'll see you next time.
You've been listening to Society and the State. For show notes, archives, and more great content, visit societyandthestate.com.